Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this wonderful panel discussion that we have every year, where we get to meet the composers that are with us in residence. And I think the first order of business is maybe we can go from my right to my left, and everyone, let's see, what are the parameters that we need? Just who you are now, you know, what is your activity, what do you do, and then what is the piece that is being performed at the festival, or has been performed already at the festival. Yeah, let's kick it off with that, and then we'll continue.
So, hello, good afternoon. My name is Iván Enrique Rodríguez, as you can see here. The piece that will be performed tonight is A Metaphor for Power. I don't want to say too much because I want you all to come and hear everything. I'm finishing my DMA at Juilliard, and I'm working on a bunch of pieces and stuff and sharing with all these people that it just has been a dream.
Hi, I'm Stacy Garrop, and I am a freelance full-time freelance composer in Chicago, Illinois. And the piece that will be performed tonight is The Battle for the Ballot. So if you watched the virtual performance of it 2 years ago, this is our world premiere of the full orchestra version.
Hi, Scott Ordway, composer from Philadelphia, though I am a Santa Cruz native. I am the composer of The End of Rain, which was premiered last night, and I'm a professor of music at Rutgers University.
Hi, my name is Paola Prestini. I am also a composer of the piece that you're going to hear tonight. It's a piano concerto called Let Me See the Sun. I am, I'm composing several different pieces right now, a lot of operas. So I have 3 grand operas happening in 3 different places. And I also founded a Brooklyn-based space called National Sawdust, which is really about the promotion of new music and mentorship for composers across all styles.
Wonderful. And when you were saying this, Stacy, about the fact that you're a full-time freelance composer, it got me thinking a little bit, actually, because this is not, it's not something that was quite as easy to achieve, I think, even as early as 30 years ago. It was difficult, right? I mean, it was difficult to have a full-time freelance composition life, because, you know, the practicalities of making sure that you have a steady stream of income and all, I mean, all the realities of life, I should say, always got in the way. But now it's more evident. I meet more people that are able to do that, yeah?
It takes a lot of hustle. So when I went freelance in 2016, I had been teaching at Roosevelt University. I had tenure, and I realized finally I couldn't get mad at all the other composers that were going out and writing wonderful operas and orchestra pieces if I wasn't willing to take the same leap of faith that they did. So that's why I began hustling like crazy and called up everybody who had ever said they wanted to work with me and said, now's the time. And I just basically worked really, really hard for a number of years. And now I don't have to hustle nearly as much. I feel like once you get something in motion, it kind of stays in motion a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pillars that a composer makes income from, and one of them is commissions. Another one is royalties from performances. I do a lot of mentoring around the country. I did a mentoring program here earlier in the week. So it was interesting when the pandemic hits, because suddenly all those pillars can fall down at once. But that was the moment I learned I actually had enough going on in motion that I was going to be okay.
Yes, and the mentorship, of course, you're talking about our conductors, composers workshop that we do every year, that I think most of you are familiar with what we do. Can I say this, Ivan, because I was surprised when Ivan really wanted to come as a conducting participant as well in the conducting workshop, and I thought, oh my God, you know, I think it would be better if you come as a composer and we're performing your music.
I mean, it's just that I love working with him. You know, and any opportunity I get, I'm just gonna throw myself in.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, but we feel the same about your music and about you being here. So I'm so happy that you're here. And Scott, you do some conducting as well, right? How does that How do those two lives intersect? Do you feel like conducting actually changes the way you compose, or the other way around?
For me, I learned to compose, conduct, and perform all at the same time, and it was incredibly important to me as I got quite a late start in classical music and didn't do any of this kind of thing until I was about 18. And as I was throwing myself wholeheartedly into all of it, I found that I wanted to be able to really relate to performers on a peer-to-peer level and be in the mix of making music together with them in a really practical way, suffering through the rehearsals and the sort of the difficult bits rather than just saying, hey, please do my piece, I'll be over here waiting. And conducting for me was an incredible way to learn a lot of the practical stuff about like what's going to make a piece work in terms of balance, what kind of information do players need and not need in order to have a successful performance. But then also, I just absolutely love it. It's so fun. I mean, it's just such a joyful, being in rehearsal, working with musicians, you said it very beautifully last night. It's just like it's like being quite close to heaven when you're in rehearsal and on the podium. So I don't conduct so much as my composition career has become a little bit more full, but it's really shaped how I am as a composer.
Yeah. Well, I'm reminded of a story in 1947 when Igor Stravinsky started conducting more and more of his music, and all of a sudden he rearranged Petrushka, which was a ballet that he had written in 1911, and it was significantly easier to conduct. Ooh, I wonder why. Yeah.
I think that's precisely what has helped me once I started conducting. I was able to have, back in Puerto Rico, a semi-professional orchestra for 5 years, and you really notice when you're a composer, you put your hat as a composer and you start writing. When you're on the podium, it's almost like you're conducting someone else's piece. And when you are able to marry those two, all of a sudden, things get easier and more practical for rehearsal and all of that. And also, I do believe that conducting is a very integral part of performance. So if you are able to write things in a way that the conductor can be musical as well, then I think you could get the ball rolling and everything will be fine in the end.
Yeah, nice. Paola, tell us what kind of performing do you like to do, or do you do any performing that is associated with your own compositions?
I mean, I started off as a singer, so I did a lot of singing in my own work, but once I got to Juilliard, it was like you had to focus. And, you know, it was, at that time, not really encouraged to do more than one thing. And I was already very interested in interdisciplinarity, so I kind of stepped away from singing and just started writing full time.
And when you write, do you sing
what
you're writing?
Yeah.
Because I noticed that in rehearsal, everything that has to do with how to do a gesture, you immediately sing it.
I know. It's because it's embodied that way, and then I can understand it better. Also, I tend to think a lot about word locution. So, if you say something like oceano, and that da-da-da-da, that kind of rhythm ends up kind of appearing in my music, and so you see that as well in this piano concerto. That certain words are stripped away in my mind, and then they become these kind of musical fragments that I can interpolate.
Beautiful. Well, I want to encourage all of you to bring your questions to our discussion. If not, I think it would be limiting. Mark, there's a microphone here. If you want to ask a question, please approach it.
I think I can talk loudly enough. It's more of a comment. You told the story of Stravinsky from a conductor's point of view, from a music publisher's point of view. It was going out of copyright, and Stravinsky would revise. So I'm expecting you all in 95 years to have new versions. Stacy in 93 years.
Actually, I will turn that comment into a question for all of you, because of course these days, and when it comes to the composition business as well, there is the choice of being self-published or being published by a publisher, and there are challenges and good things about either case. And I know you're self-published, Ivan, right?
Correct, yes. I am
Okay.
self-published.
What does that mean?
Yeah, what it means is that you, everything that you write, you also distribute and you sell. And
It's like a full-time business.
it's oh God, yes. It's a full-time business because you need to think, and also rentals. So
Yes.
you need to sit down and draft the contract and prepare everything and have the boxes and all the accounts and everything. So it is a lot of work, but on the plus side, I get to keep all the green. You know, and we basically, our job depends on all of those, as Stacy said, all of those income sources. And if you are at a point where you can still manage it, or you can afford an assistant that can do that with you, then go for it. That's the way. But sometimes it's just easier to have a publisher, and the publisher will do all of that for you.
Does the publisher do all that for you, Stacy?
It's about half and half. I actually have turned over most of my chamber and instrumental catalog to Presser, Theodore Presser Company. I actually self-publish almost all my choir pieces at this point, although I'm trying to start to hand that off to other people as well. And part of it is just looking at legacy. I want to make sure that my music stays available after I pass away. I know not to sound grim, but I really want to make sure it outlasts me. But I think a lot of publishers back in the day were able to do a lot more promotional work for composers. And there are some publishers that still have money to do that. Theodore Presser and I are very strategic. We tend to think about what are the pieces that we want to do more of a push. And we're on the phone a lot. And they coordinate with me what kind of things should we be putting out this year, et cetera. So I find that, for me, is very beneficial to be handing off large parts of my catalog. And I know I'm still good at the hustle, so I do cold calls to, I just did actually for the Battle for the Ballot, I made a wind ensemble version, which was commissioned by the University of Colorado Boulder. After it premiered in April, I emailed 200 wind ensemble conductors around the country to say, hey, I've got this exciting new piece that's, got this version. And several are now programming it. At this point, I'm turning all that over to Presser. But I made that first contact, and Presser's very happy to help along the way, but no, they don't quite have the money as some of the other bigger publishers.
So let's, if we can switch gears a little bit and talk about the, because your piece last night, Scott, congratulations, first of all, had so many elements.
I want to have all of my performances in my hometown.
So your composition had so many outside elements. How did you organize, and at what point did the music itself come in? You know what I mean? Like, how were you, to give you an example, were you looking at things here and using your photography and documenting? And did you already have kernels of ideas of how the music would be? Because also you use the words in such a natural way. You have to find the rhythm of the words in the music, all those things. Would you mind talking about that?
Sure. So The End of Rain was really a pandemic project. It was something that came out of the summer and autumn of 2020 when I was doing multimedia projects. I've worked in visual media for many years, whether it's lighting design or theater or other things. And so during the pandemic, it was quite natural to turn to video and photography as the only means of kind of moving forward. And in the summer and winter, as the fires were happening, I felt immediately moved to respond to these events, but the only meaningful thing that I could do was to sort of go around by myself and look at them. So in January of 2021, I borrowed a camper truck from my parents because even campgrounds were closed. There was no hotels, there were no campgrounds. So I was driving around and sleeping in the bed of a truck, going to really remote and desolate regions of California to see wildfires, to see the damage of fires. And so the first thing in the project was a body of still photography, which gave me a sense of the landscape. And from there, I began speaking with people and gathering the texts. And as the text started to come into focus, I was able to start structuring the piece a little bit as I designed the libretto. And then with that in place, plan more targeted photographic trips to go looking for specific things that I'd heard about in the text. The process of creating the libretto took about 6 months. just organizing 80,000 words. That's a good-sized novel worth of text, but it comes in a spreadsheet, so it's not so easy to... So the words and the visual elements were really the first bits, and the music came in quite later. And as I was composing, I had photography plastered all around my studio so that I'm continually inspired by just like keeping what I was seeing quite at the foreground. And then it becomes kind of a ping pong match where I'm doing a little bit of music and then going back and taking some more photos and then writing some more music and then doing some video, and they're always triangulating and influencing each other until the deadline. And that's where it stops.
That's where it stops. That's interesting. I know many composers that I know, that's where it actually arrives at the critical point where it has to happen.
Oh yeah, without deadlines, I would never finished a piece.
Yeah.
I can't, it would just keep going forever in this way.
Yes, I remember someone telling me one time that deadline is really the greatest source of inspiration for a composer. As you have to really finalize this. And, because it's such a long scale piece, I guess the structure of it is really, did you have a good idea of the structure at first, or did you allow things to unfold and then said, okay, now these movements together make more sense in this order?
I had to plan the structure a little bit before I started gathering the text, because, well, first of all, I love structure. I love architecture in music, and I love like really clear, sort of almost rigid, like very formal architecture. So this piece is in threes. It's in patterns of threes. So you have 3 parts. Each of those 3 parts has 3 movements within it, and then even one of those movements, number 2, has 3 sections within that. In part 1, 2, and 3, you have the same types of material moved through. So part 1, 2, and 3 all begin with a list. First, it's a list of things we lost in the fire. The second part is a list of crops that we grow near our homes, and the third is a list of plants that grow naturally. Then the second part of each part is a witness statement. It's just a statement of fact, like this is what we saw. So, and then the third part is a memory, something we remember about a time before the fire. So in order to get responses from the public that would fit into this, I had to craft my questions quite carefully. So I said, tell me the crops. It wasn't like people just naturally started telling me about kale and corn. So I had to sort of ask the public for something and then structure the final piece in response to what I heard. So the form was quite early, I think.
What about all the strawberries? There was a lot of strawberries in there.
So the strawberries and garlic, these are the two things. The strawberries is maybe more obvious. Like Santa Cruz County is where all of the strawberries in the United States come from. Like we are in the strawberry producing part of the world. So I just knew, tell me if I'm wrong, but I just knew that if I had a room full of teeth screaming strawberries over and over again, it would make people in Santa Cruz really happy. Is that more or less, that resonate? I didn't say Swanton or Driscoll, or Knott's Berry. I could drop strawberry names all day. Garlic, though, when my father was young, he worked in the garlic factory in Gilroy. And my grandparents were from Gilroy, which is the garlic capital of the world. So for me, it was just quite personal. Like I feel a connection to garlic by virtue of that. So for me, like something and garlic, like this sort of emphatic repetition of garlic is one of those other. I left out artichokes though, with apologies to anyone from Castroville.
We have a question, please.
It seemed like this was a good opportunity. Where does the musical inspiration come from? Do you wake up in the morning with something in your head that says, oh, this is it? Or is it inspired by previous composers? How do you get a new idea?
Yes. Paola, do you want to take this question?
Sure. For me, often the inspiration comes from literature. So, it's either writing vocal music based on literature, or I just wrote another piano concerto based on T.S. Eliot. But for the piece that you'll hear tonight, it was much more abstract. When Lara Downs came to me, it was really this moment where everybody was kind of commissioning women around the 19th Amendment, which was obviously a great opportunity. But for me, what was interesting is that being at the age I'm at, and I think for anybody who's kind of experienced an upward trajectory throughout history, that at a certain point you realize how far things have come and what you could have done had things been different. And so when I started to approach this piece, it was an abstract idea of what does it mean to have a frail soul human voice interacting with something that's changing constantly. And so that's pretty abstract, you know, that eventually became lines, it eventually became things I sang, eventually it was a through composed structure that I continued to evolve. But it was a really fun exercise to actually kind of take a moment in time that was so specific with the Me Too movement and what was going on at that moment before the pandemic. Because I wrote this piece obviously before the pandemic. And then to approach it now, which is really just about hope and how do we continue to have hope through change.
And to the same question, Ivan, in your piece, you're actually quoting music that has been composed before. How does that change how you come up with the musical ideas?
Well, in my case, as you will all experience tonight, those quotations were actually, the idea of quoting those songs came as the piece was growing. The inspiration from the piece is kind of like on lived experiences and how those experiences sometimes bottle up inside and you know, the system doesn't let you fix it. And they kept on growing to the point where quoting them, instead of doing the composerly thing of just taking something and developing a little bit or making something special about it, no, I just pasted them as they are and then composed over them. So I could use them as part of the development, but they were never the moving inspiration of the piece. They came out as an extra tool.
And where do you find your, I mean, you know, I think if I understand the question, well, literally, like, how do you choose that note at that moment in time? Like, does it come to you, or do you think about it? Do you calculate it? Do you feel it?
I hope my teacher is not listening. I just improvise. Because you know, I'm a romantic at heart, and I believe that, you know, when you start creating, I believe in honesty, I believe in sincerity, and when you just take all the filters away and you just start creating, something emerges. And I know this sounds very metaphysical, but I just try to let that thing that emerged lead me forward. In this piece, I do remember that I was taking a shower, and I had the sound of that opening in my head. And I spent almost 3 weeks before I started writing because I didn't know how to create it. I was like, okay, I know the sound. How do I create it? And I started spiraling down in the composerly thing, like, okay, the structure and that. No. So I just started searching for sound, and I wrote and I tested and everything, and whatever came, and I made it idiomatic for the instruments, and that's it. And then it unfolded into the rest of the piece.
So, Stacy, do you write in like piano shorthand and then orchestrate, or do you go, you know, all hand in hand? Or
It changes over time. With Battle for the Ballot, I always knew the approach would be really thinking of it as a concerto for narrator and orchestra, because I wanted to make sure that the focus stayed on the text. So in this case, I've over the years I've developed a shorthand that's like 4 piano staves where the bottom staves are the strings, since they're most of the continuity of what I wanted for this piece, and then a couple staves extra for woodwinds and brass. So that way I could, and I build movies in my head, and I'm basically scoring to the movie, and I graph out the form on a piece of paper, so I've got all these visual and things going on, and then I scored out the piece fully in that shorthand before I orchestrated it.
yeah, because this is, I mean, for the art of orchestration is both connected and separate from the actual composition of the music. You know, because so often you can have a really great idea, and if it's orchestrated poorly, it doesn't have as much, it doesn't come off the page as well. And the opposite is also true.
Yeah, and that's why, for me, form is always the most important musical parameter. If you don't have a strong form with the strong use of tension and relaxation in whatever manner you choose to use it, then I don't think the piece functions all that well. So I've learned about myself, the shorthand helps keep me focused on the form, the tension, and the relaxation.
And Ivan, where does the percussion come? At what point the percussion comes into the conversation for you?
Even before the
Before
piece.
the music.
Oh, yes. Good. I mean, I'm from Puerto Rico, so, you know, the Caribbean rhythms are in me all the time. So, you know, they are always there. What I do need to do with percussion is kind of like try to make it more sophisticated, because the palette of sounds that we have in the orchestra is limitless. But, you know, what I'm hearing are drums. You know, in my hand they're just drums. And you can flesh that out so many ways, you know, but the percussion is always the same, you know, it's always there.
Beautiful. We have a question.
Hi, everybody. I'm interested in, if you look back at your path that got you to where you are today, what do you think was essential? We have a young composer in our house, 16 years old, and he has that calling, and we want to help him realize his dream, which he already creates. He has that drive, he has that passion. But what made the difference, do you feel, in your being successful and looking at your education, your mentors? How do you see yourself getting here? What do you think got you to where you are right now? If you would share a little bit about that, I would really appreciate it.
Well, given that he's a native of Santa Cruz, Scott, do you want to tell us, since this is close to the question?
Sure. Hi, nice to see you both, by the way. I went to high school with, not their 16-year-old, but...
Okay.
It's a couple things. I think at a baseline there's a sort of unexplainable spark that motivates a person to lead an aesthetic life that's, in an artistic life, that's hard to instill. It's something that's just quite intrinsic. And it's distinct from talent, at least in my experience. It's separate. Some people are really talented but don't have this spark, and then some people have this spark and are only medium talented. So there's that. Then I think finding mentors who are irrationally committed to your well-being and who are willing to put in an amount of time which doesn't immediately make sense, but who really, really care about you as an artist, as a human being, who have your best interest in mind, and who don't offer you the easy path, but who actually teach you how to take your own steps. For me, I've had several mentors like this who have been who've had a profound impact on my development. And then the third thing is, I think, just a curiosity and a broad imagination, where the art of composition in the 20th century was very much a technical craft, and we had a sort of technological approach to composing where expertise, pure expertise, was tremendously valued, as composition found a place in the American university, at least. And I think we've come out of that period into a place where musical technique and mastery of the form is necessary but not sufficient for an artistic life. And it's so important to cultivate habits of mind which will lead you to have something worth saying as an artist. And those habits of mind are nourished by reading both novels and by reading nonfiction, by reading the news. They're nourished by travel and by studying foreign languages. They're nourished by robust conversation with interesting people. They're nourished by other art forms. They're nourished by interactions with people that aren't musicians. So developing a sort of Catholic taste, like a small C Catholic taste for just experiencing life richly, is so important. Technical mastery of the art of composition isn't, in my view, is necessary but not sufficient in our moment.
Can I add
That was a
something
bit
to that?
long-winded, but
I couldn't agree more with Scott. I think is absolutely what it is. But I think something that is invaluable, essential, completely important is support. I come from a place where if I didn't have the support of that guy over there, my husband, if I didn't have the support from him, I wouldn't be here. We can follow institutions, we can follow craft, we can develop all of that, but the mind can be very powerful, and if it's not healthy, you're not able to get anywhere. And I think all of us can attest to submitting things to many places and receiving the rejection of those many places. And this career is 98.725% rejection. And if we have the support to go through the rejection and grow, and then be able to continue with the drive that Scott is talking about, then you have a pretty nicely paved path.
I'd like to add one more thing, and that's that I was never the one in school that they thought would succeed. I was never the one that got the top scholarship, whatever. So I learned to be the scrappy underdog. I tried to figure out how those top people were getting to be where they were, who they met, how they got there, and that's how I built my career. So I think part of it is always thinking about trying to see how did people get to where they are, how can I apply, how can I get myself in that room where this all happens.
Paola, do you have any thoughts about that?
I have so many thoughts on that. I mean, I think everything my colleagues just said is so important. I would just say that, that we're in an incredible place in history where there's so many different ways to have a successful life as a composer, and that wasn't necessarily the case all the time. And so for me, that was definitely like creating my own way, creating my own work, like finding my people. And I think one of the things that's really, really crucial is to find musicians for your child that actually grow with them, because some of the most successful relationships I have are with people who keep working with me, and who keep finding opportunities. And so really from the beginning, investing in your community and investing in the people around you that you believe in, I think is important. The businessman Paul Soros said to me once, he said to a group of fellows, he said, so what would you guys do if you had one piece of pie left? And we were all like, well, you share it. And he said, no, you make more. And I think we have to have that kind of approach to our careers, which is that this is not about what you have that I don't have. It's about what I have that you can have, that you can have, that you can have, and so on. And then we began to have a healthier context.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, just 1 second and then we'll take another question, but I remember my mentor when I started conducting, and I was pushing for him because I wanted to learn how to conduct, and he told me, he said, look, if you can imagine doing anything else in life, do that because it will be easier. And I think that in some way speaks to being an artist, because it's not easy, but it does require that crazy, tenacious mind to achieve that. And then I'm also reminded of what Picasso said, that before you break any of the rules, you have to master them. Mm-hmm. And then once you break them, it's genius. So I think with those two in mind, I personally would encourage your child to study as much as possible. And then if they really believe in this truly, then that's the key to the success. Is to follow their own belief and their own path, and then just do it. I tell the conductors every single year, and so far they're all continuing conducting, which is wonderful, but I tell them, if you can imagine doing anything else, do that. It's easier.
It's for Iván. I'm curious about your tour of the refugee camps and what happened and how did it affect you.
Well, what he's talking about is that I got the opportunity of writing for the group Vision Project, which is a group that is just trying to make a difference. And they commissioned me music to write for refugee camps in Germany. and one of the refugee camps was from Nigeria, and it was pretty packed, one of the biggest, and I just had to look inward, you know, and I come from Puerto Rico. Our traditional music is bomba music, and bomba music is based on African rhythms, particularly Yoruba rhythms, which come from Nigeria. So I just sat down and wrote something that I thought could be participatory with the refugees in that place. And what was very surprising, not surprising, because how else would have, unfolded now that I think about it, but I wrote, the thing with Yoruba rhythms is that each and every one of them has a purpose, and it's very precise. And the community just know them, you know, because they are part of our religion proceedings and, you know, a bunch of different stuff. So I wrote a piece that incorporated how Puerto Rico developed the bomba with the Yoruba rhythms, but also kept the rhythms as pure as I could to the traditional ones. And there were moments where I told the string trio, invite them to clap with the rhythms. I hope they remember, I hope, I'll tell them the rhythm so they can participate. It just happened organically. When they started listening to the piece, they knew. And it was absolutely magical to see how something that could be so separated, like a string trio, and create such a community act and communication without any words. It was one of the most magical experiences I've ever had.
Beautiful. Please, we have one more question.
For those who are not familiar, Billboard magazine is a publication that keeps track of who is listening to what in our musical universe. Unfortunately, a very depressing 0.8% of the population that listens to music on a regular basis is listening to classical music, no matter what the genre might be. Now, we know that symphony orchestras and opera companies and chamber music ensembles are making efforts to promote music both new and old. So what is the composer doing to try to attract lay people to classical music?
That's a really important and great question. And it was actually in line with what I was just about to ask, because how much of what you write is driven by the audience that will listen to your piece? Or how much of it is just, okay, this is what I would like to say, and the audience will come to it at some point? Because, throughout time, I think there were the composers in both camps, and actually, to a certain degree, equally successful, So where do we start from here, and then Paola, tell us.
Sure. I mean, I think that historically, composers, let me just see if I can frame this a different way. I think that it is part of our responsibility to be thinking about how to amplify our audiences, and a lot of that has to do with what we choose as our subjects and what we choose to investigate and to put time into. So for me, that comes with, like, I had a commission right now from Atlanta Opera and San Diego Opera, and they came to me with a very broad question of, we want to do a piece about disability. And well, I don't have lived experience with disability. I'm not going to do this without really investigating this deeply, finding a very specific team, so on and so forth. So as I began to think about this piece, I began to think about really how does the Opera House actually bring people with disabilities into the space? And to be honest, the answer is it doesn't. So then that became a really larger investigation as to, okay, well, we're actually talking about community impact here, and we're talking about, making sure that, what you see on stage is actually the lived experience of people who are off stage who are disabled. And so it becomes a much bigger investigation about saying, who belongs in this audience hall? Well, everyone belongs in this audience hall. And so we as composers also have to do our part to really, truly reflect that in deeper ways, which often mean that the systems don't exist for what you're creating, and that you're not just creating music, you're also creating systems. I happen to also have graduated Juilliard at a time where it was just terrible to be a woman composer. So I knew when I had the opportunity to start a space that was going to be one of my focuses, was how do we actually bring wider groups of composers through mentoring programs to feel like they actually have a space where they can belong. I'm not saying that that's the solution, because that would be simplistic, but the key is to always be thinking, how are you forming part of a solution? And then you begin to have a healthier society.
So the question is sort of, what is the relationship between anticipating audience
Yes,
kind of
or
interest versus-
as the gentleman put it, what is your approach to reaching out to more people, either meeting them or how, you know what I mean, like with your music, so that you increase the audience?
Yeah. So for me, I think it's very important for me as a musician to also be an artist who's asking and answering questions that are relevant to the broader culture, and thinking about what conversations I want to be a part of, and responding to conversations that are taking place in a robust way already. And I try to begin pieces with a question, and not a stylized question, but a question that I actually have, that I really truly don't know the answer to. And a question that I hear other people asking and talking about. I think there's also a role of beauty in it, and this is, of course, means something very, very different to different people. But when I'm composing, I do try to think about giving a gift or making something that's really worth people's time, because we're busy and there's a lot of things you could be doing with your time besides coming to hear a piece of Scott. And I try to honor that relationship by making something that's I try to make the most beautiful thing that I can. And of course, I have to decide what that is. I can't predict what you're going to think is beautiful and then just try to reverse engineer that. That would be a spectacular failure. But I can be really honest with myself. I can try to really, really be very, very quiet and very still and listen, and really try to make music that I myself would be ecstatically happy to hear in a concert hall, and would want to hear again and again and again. And my hypothesis then is to hope that if I can write music that I truly believe in and that I'm in love with, that's the best that I can do to offer, and hopefully bring a little bit of joy and beauty and pleasure, even if I may say so, to make it a pleasurable experience to be in a concert.
I have two approaches. The first one is I'm always interested in meeting with the commissioners to find out what's important to them, what's on their minds, and then to find something that resonates with me. So for instance, the Omaha Symphony commissioned me for a piece with a classical radio station, KVNO. So we all got on the phone together, and I asked for topics, and they kept bringing up immigration. And I finally said, my family immigrated from Ukraine in 1904 to Omaha, Nebraska. And that became the story of that piece. It's Berko's journey. It's my own family, but I think so many of us we immigrated from somewhere. Our families have come from somewhere, that I hope that becomes a way that we can talk about the importance of immigration in society. The other approach is I like to plant seeds in people's heads about things that I would like to do. So, for instance, I'm very interested in prison reform. I think that we have a very high prison population here in the United States. We don't educate the people in prison to be able to succeed when they get out of prison, and I think we need to change that. So for what Jake Heggie did with the death penalty, with Dead Man Walking, that's what I would love to do with prison reform. So I'm just planting that seed out there.
You should get to know Sarah Johnson at Carnegie Hall, because she's actually the first person who brought both health reform and prison reform to Carnegie, and she does a lot of work at Sing Sing and composition there. So she's one of my best friends. If you want to meet her, might be good.
I think we have a preconceived notion of composing and composers and classical music as this separated, floating thing in the Mount Olympus or Valhalla of music. And no, we're here. We live in the same society as you do. We live the same lives you do. And we exist in that same Lockean social contract. So my approach to trying to like extend for people to engage more with classical music is just to look at society, you know, because by statistics alone, my life will be reflected on a bunch of other people. But also my neighbor is close to me and I can see their life as well. Also, another thing is the listening of classical music might have keep going down or stagnated at some low point, but enrollment in music schools, it's kind of like the same. So we have people interested. The issue is how can we make the space, the music, as in the Platonic concept of the music, more welcoming. Because, you know, I'm a brown kid, and when I go to a symphony, I see no one like me. So it's kind of like, okay, am I welcome here? But it's not only representation, because, you know, people think that you can solve that by, you know, planting, you know, not being color deaf instead of colorblind. But we need to have, you know, like Paola said, a system. We need to create systems that make organically the welcoming of people into the whole, because all the people that I've shared classical music with, they end up loving it. You know, obviously you won't love everything, but they like it. You know, they end up liking it. So it's not the music, might be the space and how we think of the space.
Absolutely. I think if I can put in just my own two thoughts as well, I think in some ways the problem with reaching out to a wider audience is that at times we feel helpless and we give this task to an organization to do it. But it is true, if anything is to go viral, it's from person to person. So you are the best advocate for the classical music art form to expand. Because if each one of you in the room will talk to a neighbor or a friend that has never heard of Cabrillo Festival, if that's even possible, but if each one of you will talk about the festival and about the music, and then they in turn will talk to another friend, I think pretty quickly we will need to build a new concert hall. So that's, in some ways, that's it needs to be from person to person, and the power of your conviction should reflect the passion with which you allow other people to enjoy this beautiful art form that connects us all. And I think it's quite simple, actually, or unfortunate to just say, well, you know, the symphony should do a better job in advocating for themselves. No, you are the symphony. The symphony is creating the art, but you are the symphony that spreads that art around. So I think without all of us allowing ourselves to really speak loudly how much we love what we hear, then I think it will never go beyond that 0.8%. This is my personal feeling.
Do you have time for a
Lara.
question from me? So I would love to, first of all, yes, everything you just said, yes. I would love to hear each of you speak a little bit about collaboration. So as an artist who collaborates a lot with composers, I have a range of experiences when it comes to actually a collaborative process. And sometimes, you know, people go away into their little rooms and they come back with a finished piece and say, you're welcome. And sometimes we're like building something from the beginning and throwing, you know, ideas back and forth. And what's so amazing and special about this space is this opportunity to be collaborative and to build things. And Paola and I just over the last 2 days, you know, it's been this opportunity to share perspectives on a piece. But if you could just talk about that a little bit, who you're writing for and how that factors into what you're writing.
For those of you that don't know, Lara Downs is our pianist tonight, who will be performing Paola's wonderful piece. And the question is, how does the collaboration itself with an artist change, or does it change what you are writing? Who would like to go first? I've been asking people, so now you get to choose.
I'm happy to take it for start. I love collaborating. I've spent like the better part of 20 years doing really in-depth collaborations with specific artists and muses, and I find it really exciting to be here at Cabrillo because often, the orchestral world is pretty much the most difficult world to crack in the sense that you have to know people. You have to, you don't learn how to write for orchestra unless you write for orchestra. And so what's really great about being here is that process is refining. But what I love about the road I did take is that there's a way in which you learn so much about yourself through other people. And so I'm very intentional about the collaborations I take, because to me it's like the idea of school beyond school. So what person am I going to write for next? What am I going to learn? How are we going to do this together? How are we breaking form? What is the innovation in it? Those are the things that really excite me and then help me refine as an artist. And so I choose very specifically the themes I want to do, the operas I want to write, and then obviously you hope for opportunities to write for orchestra. That's still a world that I'm kind of learning about. But for example, right now, one of my biggest collaborations I did during the pandemic, I didn't actually meet my collaborator until May. We had done a piece for the Broad Museum. It's actually up in installation right now, and it's going to begin to tour. And we did our entire collaboration virtually. And he's a buto dancer. The ballerina is the prima ballerina of New York City Ballet, and then my husband's a cellist. And so the three of us were working on this kind of installation that I was directing. We didn't meet until May. So we had done 2 years, and I think if I hadn't understood like all those 20 years of collaborating across cultures, learning language, being humble, understanding like the processes, that I probably wouldn't have been able to create something where we weren't in the same room, So it's collaboration. What people don't realize is you don't go to school and learn collaboration. It's something that you learn after, in a way, you've kind of mastered craft. You don't really master craft because you master your craft throughout your whole life. But, you have some tools, and then you come together, and then collaboration is the thing that you do throughout your whole life and refine, I find. But anyway, now I'm back at Juilliard teaching that, so it's come full circle.
Who would like to continue?
I'll go next. Oh.
For me, I think it's increasingly impossible to be a composer who's not a good collaborator. It's an old model that I think hopefully is on the way out. My personal experience, and thank you for your question, it's such an important one, is that I've learned how to compose from the performers that I've worked with in bits and pieces throughout my career. And orchestra is one of the hardest opportunities to collaborate just by virtue of the logistics. There's only so much you can kind of rewrite the parts once it's already in rehearsal. But solo pieces and chamber pieces are absolutely a joy to work on if you have a willing collaborator who's willing to read through drafts and who's willing to have long conversations with you about the repertoire that they love and that you love. And for me, the more steeped I can be in the repertoire of a particular instrument, the better of a conversation I can have with that person. Or the more, if you want to write for orchestra, the more you can know the orchestra repertoire, the better conversation you can have with the players who are playing it. But for me, I think that performers who really love the collaborative process are what teach composers how to really, really, truly understand not just the instrument, but actually the whole life like the life of a pianist is different than the life of a trumpet player. And you have to, if you want to really understand how to write a piano piece, you need to have some idea of who a pianist is and what their training is like and what their life is like. What are their habits and like routines, and what is a week? A week in your life is very different than a week in the life of a singer, for example. So it's about the whole person, I think, and getting to know as much as you can.
My oldest collaborator friend I met in 1992 in Michigan. Christopher Creviston is a saxophonist, and we have collaborated over and over and over and over again throughout our lives, and we're still learning together. There's still many pieces we're discovering new things that we've never thought of together. And so that's an example of just how long these can go on and still be so fresh and new and exciting. On the other side, one of the reasons I quit my job and went freelance is because I want to be an opera composer. And if I thought I knew what collaboration was before I got into opera, I clearly had no idea, because when you get into an opera situation, you are one cook in the room of many cooks. And being a concert composer, you're not really trained for that. So it really taught me a lot more about humility and listening to everybody in the room before I speak myself. And then having, when I go back and work with people like Christopher now and classical artists, I have far more appreciation for everything that they can bring to the picture.
I think that sums it up absolutely perfectly, because, and it goes back to the same thing I mentioned earlier. We have this preconceived notion of the composer genius, but we have our expertise, and the performers have their expertise. You know, I play the paper, they play their instruments, so they know more about the instrument than I do. So they reach out to me because they like my music, and if we're going to collaborate, it's a mutual trust kind of relationship, because I learn from everything that they provide because of their expertise, and then I craft my idea based on that. And it goes even beyond just the instrument. When I find it, one of the most rewarding things is writing something for someone, because you are making it for that particular person. And imagine if an instrument is different from another instrument, it is even more different inside the same instrument family, or the same instrument, just two different people. You know, their approach to their instrument is completely different, and you can create so much more if you just meet the person and you spend time with the person and just create that trust relationship, you know? So I think it goes back again to just collaborating and being, as I told the composers and conductor in the workshop, just be nice.
It does go a long way.
It goes a long way, yes.
Yes.
But you also
Yes.
have to learn how to stand up for yourself. Because like one of the things, I have an opera opening up in Minnesota, and what I learned is like, at the end of the day, like that music is mine. Like you cannot create music by consensus. You know what I mean? In the end, that music it's hopefully gonna live on. So I think like you also learn in collaboration, like what fights you're willing to give up and which ones you're not. And that is also incredibly important, because at the end of the day, you have to be 100% truthful. There is no compromise, because the compromise, you end up paying for it. You know what I mean? Like ultimately, instinctually, you have to know those lines.
And I think that also it's even more enriching, because it teaches you with whom you want to collaborate.
There you go. That's
Because
right.
if you collaborate with someone that it's at that same page with you, they will know to what extent they will ask what. You know, they wouldn't want to insult you or you know, go too far, you know? And I think that's something that we deal with all the time, more so in the opera world, that I know it's so dense
But it
with
goes
creative.
back to what you said. You just have to say it very nicely.
You know,
What
I
you're
tell,
talking about is finding performers who respect the craft of the composer as much as we're striving to respect the craft of the performer.
yes, and you know, as I like to tell orchestras often, the best way to sound your best in the ensemble is to make sure that your colleague sounds better than you. You know, to find a way to make them sound better, because that then together everybody will bring each other up to their best level. And I think there is an element of that between composition and performance. You know, so I think it's a very mutual, beneficial way to explore our beautiful art form. Well, believe it or not, here we are. We have exhausted our time. Thank you all so much for listening to us, and thank you for your wonderful thoughts, and we cannot wait to see you at the concert. Thank you.